yesterday. Half the people got it, half the people didn't. I actually came on. I had planned on I was going to come on here and talk about the Hulk Hogan, what I really thought about it, and not be funny about it, and actually, really kind of talk about it. Also thought about talking about, ROH and Dragon Gate putting shows against each other WrestleMania weekend, and how I thought that sucked, and I think both of them need to figure out a way to fix it. And some other things as well I was planning on talking about. But I started getting all these emails about freaking Doug. Because Doug does a video talking about Hulk Hogan and Nigel McGuinness. And during the video, he talks about the Knockouts division and women's wrestling. And I hope, that some of the things he said, he just misspoke. Because some of the things he said I agree with. Not that, for example, not that, men are superior to women in the wrestling ring. Don't agree with that at all, because, late 80s, early 90s, women's wrestling pretty much is probably the biggest influence, you could argue, on today, on what we consider pro wrestling, particularly like the X Division and high flying and juniors, that sort of thing. Probably a bigger influence than just about anything, you could argue. Especially stuff from the 90s. There's tons of great matches, women's matches, mostly coming from Japan. That was just amazing. Personally, to me, the greatest show of all time was a women's show. There's at least 2 or 3 matches that, if you listed probably the top matches of the 90s, there's at least 2 or 3 matches that would be probably in that list. And I'm talking like if you do like a 20. I'm not talking like a top 10. There probably would be one, and there's a couple of matches that you could argue could be in there. So I don't buy that. I think that good women's wrestling, and great women's wrestling is just as good and just as entertaining as men's. Problem is that we don't see that today, because the WWE, doesn't hire women's wrestlers. They hire models and teach them how to wrestle, and then they suck. It's just kind of the way it is. And then, you have in Japan right now, because of the downward, spiral of pro wrestling as far as popularity goes in Japan, women's pro wrestling is even further dwindled in popularity, and is, would be considered indie levels here in the United States. Really the only place where women's wrestling is seen as somewhat, good, I would say on a consistent basis, would be Mexico, where they have, they brought in a lot of the best women from around the world and do a pretty good job with them, and a lot of their matches are pretty good. And then you have TNA, and he in particular was talking about TNA, he was particularly talking about the X Division, and so women's wrestling is not where it once was. The Knockouts division, I would say, definitely isn't where it once was. He talked about the fact of, maybe they needed their own show and all that. I don't agree with that. He also talked about the fact of having, that he didn't think that they should be having 2 Knockouts division matches on pay-per-view. I agree with that now, only because you are getting crappy matches on pay-per-view. If you weren't getting crappy matches on pay-per-view, I would fully be okay with it. And I'm sure he'd be fully okay with Awesome Kong versus Tara. I don't think he's okay with, the Knockout champions taking on the Beautiful People, and the Beautiful People now sucking in the ring because the worker of the group is now gone. If I was TNA, I would be doing everything I could to get her a visa, and making sure she was getting a visa, and, getting her back in TNA, because I think that she may have actually been a bigger loss to TNA than Gail Kim was at this point. I mean, it is shocking how much she is missed. It's just like, as far as on screen, now that behind the screen scenes and all that, maybe Gail Kim was more missed, but that sort of thing. But so I would agree with that. I think that one of the things that TNA has kind of failed on when it comes with the Knockouts division is that they didn't go out and they didn't necessarily bring in the best women that they could necessarily find. I think there's a lot of women they could bring in that look good, because you have to look good. I'm sorry, but that's part of the thing, is that women do have to look good. They do have to be attractive, much the same way that most men who wrestle in a pro wrestling ring have to be somewhat, attractive. The women have to sit there and say, as far as the men, I want to be with that guy. And the men have to say, I want to be that guy. And same thing with the women, is the men have to say, I want to be with that woman, and the women have to say, I want to be that woman. You have to do that, or it just doesn't work. So, and there's a lot of women that I think they could bring in. There's a lot of women I wish they would try to bring in that they don't. You have Shimmer, and I'm sure a lot of people would bring that up. And I don't think he was talking about women's wrestling as a whole, because he did talk about the fact that he did like, Gail Kim and Awesome Kong, and he thought that was as good as any men's match. So I think in some ways I'm hoping he misspoke. If not, well then, hell bent and let everybody in the world just throw crap at him because he deserves it. But I would say that he did bring up a valid point, that the women's division isn't as good as it once was. The Divas suck for the most part because WWE isn't concerned about actually doing a real women's division. And so I think that to some degree, I think some people overreacted, though I do understand why they somewhat overreacted because of the words he used. But I think that they were listening to that and not with what he was trying to say. I really do think he probably misspoke. At least I hope so. But, I would freely sit here and tell you that I think women's wrestling, in the past has been very good. I would recommend anyone that doesn't know a lot about women's wrestling to actually get the movie Dynamite and Lipstick, or Lipstick and Dynamite. I think it's Lipstick or Dynamite and Lipstick, which is about the early days of women's pro wrestling here in the United States, which, even if you see that, you see them wrestling a style that was not wrestled at that time by the men, and they had to wrestle that style because that was how they drew, is that they were more athletic, they did more moves, they did all these sort of things to make themselves even more unique other than just women, and there was the sex appeal and all of that as well. But yeah, I think that he did bring up a fairly good point in that the fact that TNA is, if you look at some of the women that TNA is pushing as the knockouts, they're not wrestlers, they're people who should be valets. I do agree with the point that, these women should be valets. Look at Lacey Von Erich. Lacey Von Erich should not be in the ring. Every time I see Lacey Von Erich doesn't look like $1 million, she looks like $1 billion. Okay? But she's horrible in the ring, to the point where I truly think that at some point her grandfather is going to come back from the grave and kick her ass in the middle of the ring because she's so bad. And if you know anything about Fritz Von Erich, you get what I'm saying. It is just amazing to me that they think that her in the ring is a great thing. Tonight I saw Impact. They hit her as best they could, and even then she wasn't very good. Even though she looks great, no doubt about it. And I think that there are definitely women within TNA that are good, but I think they definitely need more of them. I think you need at least 10 women in TNA who can actually go, and they don't have that right now. I think they probably have 5 or 6, and they probably need to bring in about 4 more women, and they definitely probably need, like I said, they definitely need to get, Angelina Love's visa thing figured the fuck out. There's no doubt about that. But I definitely don't agree with him. But at the same time, I don't think that WWE or TNA are really doing a good job of promoting women's wrestling. I think if you do it the right way and you bring in the right women, it can be a big deal, because we know that while women don't make up a huge percentage of, the pro wrestling audience, they do make up a percentage of it. And I think if you cater to that percentage, that's not a bad thing, because you're talking about a niche within a niche. Excuse me, I got dust in my throat. Or something. I always bring back, people always bring up, Trish Stratus. And Trish Stratus was very popular, but she was mostly popular with men. If you look instead with Lita or Chyna, who were popular with not just men, but also women. Both of them were probably, there was a lot of women that liked them, and just like there was a lot of men that liked them. So I think if you look at that, and of course there were women that liked them for, not just because they were strong women who happened to be good in the ring. They liked them for the same reason guys would like them. And that's fine too, because I think that, like I said, a niche within a niche, that if you push that sort of thing, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's actually a good thing. And I think that there needs to be more of that to a degree. And I think if you did that, I think you would start seeing maybe, it would probably take, take 2 or 3 years, and you'd start seeing better women getting in pro wrestling. And to that degree, because let's face it, where you've seen a lot of men and you've seen MMA as far as men go kind of take off, you really haven't seen it with women per se. And you know, you can have these good-looking women who don't have to worry about necessarily getting severely hurt in MMA and can still have their looks and be marketable and all these things and go into pro wrestling and, you know, kind of go that way. So, you know, to me, it's more of you just don't have anybody really using pro wrestling as far as women correctly, because you have women who should be valets that aren't valets, and you have women who are really good in the ring who aren't being, you know, shown in the WWE or TNA. They're in Mexico. You know, both Mexican promotions usually on their shows usually have at least one good women's match on it, and they have, you know, that. I would love to see I'll tell you what, I'd love to see TNA actually do like a World X Cup for the women. I would love to see that, and them actually go out and try to bring in as many of the top women wrestlers as they possibly can, from Japan, from Mexico, you know, probably maybe from the Indies as well that aren't signed in TNA, and really show what women can do. Because I think if you do that, I think you really demonstrate something. But hey, you know, there's that. But to the point of, I do think he made a point. I don't think he chose his words correctly, though. I'm not trying to, you know, sound like apologize for him, but I do think people are overreacting a tiny bit. Now, if he meant what he said, that, you know, women have truly no place in pro wrestling, or that men are always going to be better than women, then, you know, he's completely wrong. And you can look at, you know, Japanese women's wrestling in the 90s and show that. And then even to some degree back in the 40s and 50s as well, where the women were putting on, I would say, more athletic type matches. So there is that, and also the fact that, particularly when we talk about Japanese women, like I said, you know, you're talking about matches which influenced even what we see today on the men's side. So that definitely says something about those matches. So there is that. That's all I wanted to say. Have a good one. With that, I'm out.